Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's so good to see you all. My name is Emily Dimiturko, and I'm the Communications Officer with SAS Books. We are the Creative Industry Association for book publishers here in Saskatchewan. Tonight, as a part of Book Week 2020, we are so excited to celebrate the 20th anniversary book launch and a video premiere for Tunnels of Time by Mary Harrelkin Bishop. Before we get started, we have some quick acknowledgements we'd like to do. First off, SAS Books is located on Treaty 4 territory in Regina, which sits on the homeland of the Nahiawak, the Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota peoples, as well as the Métis Nation. We want to take this time to pay our respects to the ancestors of this place and acknowledge the historic and ongoing care of these lands, and to affirm the United Nations declarations on the rights of the Indigenous peoples. Further, we recognize that acknowledgement is just the first step in a larger commitment to writing relations. So this is just the first step on our journey as well. For other acknowledgements, we'd also like to thank our funders, the Department of Canadian Heritage through the Canada Book Fund and the Canada Council for the Arts. Without their support, Book Week would not be possible, so thank you. And finally, we would like to thank Munns Media, who filmed and produced the video you are about to watch in a couple sections. We would especially like to thank Andy, Zach, and Des from Munns Media. Thank you so much for your help and support. For some general housekeeping, we've already gone over this a couple times, but just in case anyone's a little bit later coming in, about Zoom. For Zoom, this session is being recorded for posterity. However, Zoom only records the video of those who are being highlighted in speaker view with the green box around the video. If you do not wish to be recorded, please remain muted, and then Zoom will not be able to record your audio or your video. As you may have noticed, you are all automatically muted when you enter the Zoom call. That's so we can ensure that everyone can hear the video and hear Mary later as the presenter. If you would like to ask a question, please use either the raise hand feature, which is on the bottom bar of your screen, or in the participants window, since it's much easier to see them raising your hand in real life with everyone's tiny pictures here. One of the hosts will then call on you, and then you can unmute yourself to ensure that everyone can be heard in time. As we mentioned before, to unmute yourself, there's a button in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen along the little bar that looks like a little microphone. However, if you would prefer not to speak aloud, if you type your question in the chat box, the little speech bubble down at that bottom bar, a moderator would be happy to read a question for you in the question and answer period. If you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat in the meantime, and one of us will be happy to give you a hand. But in the meantime, I would like to introduce one of our special guests tonight, Dina Driver. Dina runs DriverWorks Inc., which is one of the well-established and one of our fondest publishers here in the Saskatchewan publishing industry. And Dina sits on the board of Sask Books. And Dina will be coming in to introduce our presenter for the night, Mary Harrelkin Bishop. Dina, I give the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Oh, it just as a doorbell rings at my house, which we are promptly.
That's okay, Pete went to get it.
Tunnels of Time book by and author Mary Harrelkin Bishop. I met Mary in 2004. She and I both attended a self-publishing workshop in Saskatoon. I had already written a book and published it, and Mary had already written the Tunnels of Time series. And she is sort of like a walking encyclopedia, or a walking huge, I don't know how to describe it. She always has about 4 books going on in her head at the same time. So if there's a word for that, somebody else can fill it in. But it's overwhelming. We met at this workshop. We became instant friends. And a few years after that, I started my publishing company. And Mary's Seeds of Hope was one of the first books that I published in collaboration with her. Since then, I've worked on Moving Forward and Gina's Wheels by Mary, Mastosany, Skybird and the Eagle Feather, and then of course this amazing book that we're here to launch and celebrate tonight, Tunnels of Time. So She's one of the best children's authors that I've ever worked with, and I've worked with some pretty awesome ones, with one of whom's on the screen as well, Janice. Saskatoon, yay!
Yay!
But it's an honor to work alongside her and to be offered the opportunity to republish and update this book. It has been a beloved Saskatchewan treasure for 20 years, and we're so pleased to introduce that to you. So without further ado, welcome Mary Harrelkin Bishop.
Thank you, Dina. That was wonderful. First of all, thank you, everyone. I wish I could see all your faces. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And I do feel bad. I've got a couple texts from people who can't get on, but hopefully we can show them the video later. This is my first Zoom launch, and as you've noticed, we've already had technical glitches, but that's okay. I guess this might be the wave of the future. So my job tonight is to introduce you to the video right now and to let you know that there will be a Q&A afterward. First, I need to thank a lot of people. I need to thank Savannah, who isn't here tonight, from SAS Books, who had this brilliant idea of having me read aloud in the tunnels. And who would even have thought that that was possible during COVID? But she got it all arranged and we went down, and she has just been so helpful and so enthusiastic about this whole idea. And I really appreciate her. I need to thank Kelly of the Tunnels of Moose Jaw, who is the artistic director and the manager of the tunnels. She gave us the run of the tunnels for about 4 hours. We had so much fun just walking through the tunnels, and she is a font of amazing information about the Moose Jaw in the 20s and 30s and so on. And so it was really wonderful to have her, to have her let us do that. The two men were already mentioned, Zach and Andy, who did an amazing job with this video you're going to see. And as always, I need to thank my family. There's so many of my family right here on this little video, and I really appreciate you. You always support me or show up to these events or try to show up, as my daughter and one of my sisters has tried but couldn't get on. But I just really appreciate it all. So thank you so much to my daughter-in-law and my son and my daughter. My two grandsons were supposed to be here eating popcorn. They're 2 and 5, but I think they didn't get to see it, but that's okay. They'll see it another time. But anyway, thanks family, and thanks to all my friends and all my wonderful support out there. I have to say thanks to you, Dina, my publisher, my editor, but mostly my friend. Like you say, we became instant friends, and we are just a great team. She brings out the best in my writing and just always goes above and beyond to ensure that I am successful, and I so appreciate that. So after all, oh, I got to say thanks to Pete too, who, yeah, right there. Thank you, Pete, for putting up with me. And now on to the video. So this is a 10-minute video of me sitting here reading aloud to you. Not. It is a wonderful video. You will hear my voice. You will see me sometimes, but what you will get is a wonderful tour of the tunnels and various artifacts that you see in the tunnels. As I said, Andy and Zach have done a fabulous job, and so I don't think you'll be falling asleep. I think it's just an amazing little video, and I feel so honored that Savannah and everybody chose me to do this read aloud and then to make this a little video, and I sure hope you enjoy it. So it's about 10 minutes long, and when we come back, then we can start asking questions, I guess. So enjoy. Hello there. My name is Mary Harrelkin Bishop, and I am excited to share this updated version of Tunnels of Time with you. This story is a time travel adventure about Andrea, a 13-year-old girl who accidentally falls into the tunnels and goes back in time to the 1920s when gangsters were in Moose Jaw. Very quickly, Andrea finds herself having to work for the gangsters as a tunnel runner in the tunnels under Moose Jaw, just like the tunnel we're in right now. It's exciting, but very dangerous work. We've updated some of the language, shortened the chapters, added great illustrations, and more resources such as historical notes and a Q&A with the author, me. The plot and action of the story are the same, as you will see when I read an exciting part for you right now. So, let's get started. The part I'm going to read for you, since we're in the tunnels, is the part when Andrea runs into the very first gangster. The gangster turned his attention back to Andrea. "So you don't know the ropes yet, huh, kid?" He spoke softly, yet Andrea felt chills chase one another up and down her spine. The tiny hairs on the back of her neck stood up in warning. This man, whoever he was dangerous. Every instinct in Andrea's body screamed for her to run, to escape before something terrible happened. But she stood rooted to the spot. Even if she could run, she had nowhere to go. No, sir," she heard herself whisper, deciding she had better concentrate on what he was saying. She didn't want to have any more trouble with him. She stared hard at his sparkling white and black patent leather shoes. They were so shiny, she was sure she could see her terrified features mirrored there. The man took a sinister step toward her, grabbed the back of her head and hair, and roughly jerked. It happened so quickly that Andrea didn't have time to dodge. She felt the cap on her head wobble and almost tumble to the floor. Luckily, it stayed in place, hiding her true identity. Andrea's head swung up, and she found herself staring helplessly into the man's face, tears of pain forming in her eyes. A deep, ugly scar ran down the side of the man's cheek. It was old Scarface. Andrea was sure of it. Who else would have a scar like that? "What you staring at, kid?" he demanded, pulling her hair even more tightly, causing Andrea to rise up on unsteady tiptoes to try to ease the pain. "So you don't like my face job, huh? This'll learn you a lesson." His eyes glittered angrily. He raised his hand as if to give her a backhand across the mouth when the clatter of footsteps was heard coming down the steep, narrow stairs. A wiry, nervous little man stood waving his arms in agitation, sputtering meaningless words into the blue air. "Well, speak up, man. We ain't got all day," old Scarface shouted. "The cops are coming to raid Scotty's," he finally managed to spit out. "What?" Scarface released Andrea abruptly. She sank to the floor at his feet, her knees having finally given out from panic and pain. "How do you know?" old Scarface shouted. Coffee. They were having coffee here and let it slip out. I overheard them." Scarface thumped a beefy, mean-looking fist into the palm of his other hand. "We gotta do something." His eyebrows suddenly shot up. "You," he yelled, grabbing Andrea once again by the hair. "You owe me for bursting into this joint, uninvited like that." He dragged her across the room and pulled the armoire roughly away from the wall. It creaked and groaned from the sudden movement, almost falling from its hinges. "In there, now!" "Where?" Andrea's mind screamed. The tunnel that she and Vance had just used was on the other end of the room. Only a small hole was visible in the dirt wall beneath the shiny armoire. It looked like the start of a tunnel, one that hadn't been completely hollowed out yet. In there?" Andrea whispered in horror. Even in her worst nightmares, she had never been subjected to the mortal terror he was now suggesting. I can't," she murmured, but her words were lost in the shuffling noises of the gravel under their feet. Somehow Vance found his way to her side. "It's okay, Andy," he whispered as he grabbed her arm, pretending to help direct her into the black hole of doom. "This tunnel leads to Scotty's. Crawl as fast as you can. You must get there in time to warn them. That's the only way to get out of his bad books." He jerked his head in Scarface's direction. The small opening in the dirt loomed in front of her. Old Scarface bodily picked Andrea up and shoved her into the void. She fell to her hands and knees inside. Looking back over her shoulder in fear, she saw Scarface slam the armoire closed, leaving her in total and completely suffocating blackness. "Hurry, boy," he yelled. "You better make it in time or else." "Well then, I'd better get going," Andrea decided grimly. She set off on her hands and knees, crawling over rocks and large clumps of dirt. In the space of a few meters, her knees stung, her hands were scratched and cut. Cobwebs hung low and slapped her in the face as she passed. Andrea shut her eyes and gritted her teeth. "Don't think about it," she said to herself, as her imagination began to work overtime. But thoughts of spiders, immense and hairy with grotesque faces, began to haunt her thoughts. The narrow space was suddenly enlarged. With a sigh of relief, Andrea stood, crouched over, and ran, ecstatic to be able to move more swiftly. The darkness, though, was airless and stifling. She felt something thump her softly on the back and roll off. A scream jumped out of her open mouth, and she quickly clamped her own dirty hand over it to stop more noise from escaping. There was no telling if the sound would travel or not, but Andrea didn't want to take any chances of being heard. The journey felt endless. She was in a black hole of terror. There was no exit, and she was lost, doomed to starvation and certain death. No, she wouldn't go there in her thoughts. Don't panic. She forced her mind to think of other things. The tunnel curved. In the darkness, Andrea didn't see the turn. She ran into the side of the dirt wall. Part of it caved in, falling on her shoulders and back. Vance's hat threatened to jiggle loose on her head, and she quickly jammed it back into place. She ran on. She'd worry about the dirt later. Would this blackness never end? But soon it did, for just up ahead, Andrea could suddenly see a whisper of light escaping from a small hole. She stumbled and fell, picked herself up, and ran on, her eyes never straying from the deliverance of light ahead. It grew larger and brighter as Andrea closed in on it. It was a vent at waist level. Andrea bent down and peered breathlessly into the lighted area on the other side. It was the basement of a shoe store. There were boxes of shoes everywhere, and tools and equipment that Andrea thought must be used for repairing and making shoes. The 6 men they had delivered earlier were there, along with 2 others and several women. A card game was in progress, and judging by the pile of money in the center of the table, there was gambling happening as well. All of this Andrea noted in a matter of nanoseconds. Now that she had reached her destination, she did not want to fail by forgetting to warn the people. "Hey," she called out weakly. She felt stupid and silly, calling from outside the room. "Did you hear something?" One of the women asked suspiciously, her head whipping back and forth to catch the faint sound. Everyone went stiff and still, as if they were expecting trouble of some sort. "Hey," Andrea called more loudly this time. "Over here, in the vent." 2 men jumped up from the table and quickly removed the vent cover. Andrea fairly leaped the meter or so down to the basement floor. It felt like paradise after her horrifying trip through that tunnel. "The cops are coming! There's going to be a raid!" "Raid!" they all shouted and jumped into action. 2 men forced the vent cover back into place as a woman swept up the dirt that had slid in with Andrea. Another tall cupboard like the armoire in the cafe was slid open, revealing a large hiding space. It looked as if it had originally been a small storage area. It now stood empty, ready to hide the fugitives from the police. The men, carrying their alcoholic beverages, cards, and money, scurried into the hollowed-out space and were quickly joined by the women. "Come on," one of them shouted to Andrea. "Get in here, quick!" Andrea raced across the room and into the crowded space just as pounding feet were heard on the wooden floor above. 2 men remained outside and shoved the cupboard closed, cleverly concealing the people hidden behind. Noisy feet clattered down the stairs and burst into the basement room. "This is a raid!" one of the cops shouted as they skidded to a stop in the silent room. So there's Andrea with a bunch of people she doesn't know, stuck in a closet. What do you think will happen? Will she still have to work for the bad guys? For the gangsters? Will she ever get back to the present and find her family again? I guess to find out, you'll have to read Tunnels of Time. Yeah. Yeah, that was brilliant.
We were very, very honored to be asked by Sask Books to have Mary go to the tunnels and do this reading. And thank you so much, Savannah. Brilliant idea. She's
Yeah.
busy with some of the other Saskatchewan Book Publishing Week events. She's had a very, very busy week. And again, we're thrilled to be part of that celebration.
Yeah, I think she's in Swift Current right now, isn't she?
Maybe,
Hosting another event,
maybe.
something like that. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask?
Oh,
Oh, here's a Sandra Brookman saying, I'll be showing the video to my class for sure. Weren't we just talking about that, saying teachers want this video? Good.
We'll be trying to put it up on, sorry, go ahead, Emily.
No worries. Yes, we will try to be putting it up online so people can view it at their own leisure and not over a Zoom call where it can sometimes get a little bit buggy. We have some questions, I believe. The first one, because she has been raising her hand so patiently and lovely.
That's Jennifer.
Jennifer Wallace. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Well, I'm a teacher, so I know all about the hand raising. Hi, Mary.
Hi,
I'm so
Jen.
curious as to what language has been updated. I was just trying to think back to the original piece, and I thought, I wonder what it was that you felt needed to be updated for now, 20 years later.
I don't know if it was particular language per se, but as a writer, you're always growing. I'm always growing with everything that I'm writing. So you'll notice too with your own writing that when you take your manuscript or whatever and go back and read it later, you'll go, oh, I could have wrote this different, or I could have done this different. And so, you know, that's kind of what mostly we were working at.
There's one example that we can give about Andrea and what she looked like. Mary,
there is that example.
Yeah.
In the original book, I had that Andrea looked more like a 10-year-old boy. And now as more and more we're being enlightened with transgender and that kind of thing, I really wanted to fix that so that to be more inclusive and just not to, you know, point fingers or anything to anyone. So that was one thing that I really wanted to do. I think another thing was a silly thing, but it was talking about Reebok runners. And does anybody, well, I'm sure some people still wear Reeboks, but who knows what Reeboks even are. So they just became running shoes. I think those were the two main things. The other thing was to update it a little bit with social media, not to actually bring social media into the story too much. And so you'll notice at the very beginning that Andrea's mother takes her cell phone away. So she mentions it a couple of times in the story. And of course, when I published it long ago, no one had, I don't think I had a cell phone for about 7 or 8 years after that. So yeah, so just to update it that way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There was also research, a lot more research that went in that was added to the amount of research that you did before. I don't know if anyone wants to, you want to comment?
Oh yeah, I can talk about that too. So back in, I first saw the tunnels in 1997, which is just incredible. Took my family down there. And when I tried to do some research, very few people would actually talk to me about the tunnels, because to admit that you had a tunnel in your business on Main Street or on some of the side streets, River Street and Fairford and all of that, was to basically admit that somebody in your family had at some point been doing some illegal activities. And so very few people would talk to me about it. I also had people who said, no, it's just propaganda. There are no tunnels. They don't actually exist. And so it was about 4 years ago when Al Capone's great niece, Deirdre Capone, wrote a book about Al Capone and talked about him coming to Saskatchewan, to Moose Jaw. And so that was when I could finally say, aha, he was here. So one thing we did do in terms of updating was to put a historical note in. Originally, when I had written the book and Cotto published it, they wouldn't let me put that historical note in because it was considered that the tunnels weren't real. So that was, yeah, interesting stuff.
And even last, when we were there as part of this filming, Mary and I were privileged to go tour a couple of other really unique buildings and basements, which we're going to put online eventually. But we found more stories of people who knew of family members who had connections to the tunnels, who knew of stories, who saw the tunnels, like the original tunnels. And we also talk to people who still think it's all bunk. So it's
Yeah.
really fascinating.
Yes, it's very fascinating. We toured the CPR station in the basement, which was an amazing experience, as well as in the other part of the train station is the beautiful liquor board store. They've done a fabulous job of refurbishing the tunnels, but we got to go into the basement there and see the actual stairs that went down. Well, actually, that was in the other part. But anyway, see the actual stairs that went down and then under the train tracks and then up to the other side where you would catch the train. So it's really interesting too. I think more people are opening up about the fact that somebody in their family was a tunnel runner or, you know, met Capone doing this or that. And it's really neat that the stories are just starting to come out more and more.
That's fascinating to hear. Not that we would like an extra book from you about that, but just gonna put that out in the universe.
Yeah, sure.
We have several more questions. First one, a compliment from Janice Howden. Janice says, awesome presentation, loved the video.
Oh, thank you, Janice.
And another one, this one here is from Carol Goddard. Carol asks, what inspired you to write the trilogy?
So it's actually 5 books. Tunnels of Time, then Tunnels of Treachery. Nope, forgot Terror. Tunnels of Terror, Treachery, Tyranny, and then Next Stop Chicago. So it's actually 5 books in that series. What started was I went to the tunnels in 1997, and I was so fascinated by the idea that gangsters could have been in Moose Jaw. It also talked about the Chinese immigrants living and working in the tunnels because they had to pay the thing called the head tax. And history has always been really important to me. Really, it was mostly what I read as a child, a lot of biographies and things like that. And so as I went through that tunnel, I actually dragged my family through 3 times in one day to see it. And during the last tunnel tour, I am very visual, and I saw these 2 kids in my head running through the tunnels, and I could feel they were scared. And that was the start of the story. And that turned out to be Andrea, of course, that I talked about, and Vance in the story. But the other part that you need to know is that I have been writing since I was 9 years old. And so when this idea jumped into my head, I recognized it. I knew it was a story idea, and I just took it and ran with it. So it was very fun to write then, and it's very fun to think about now.
And our intention, Mary's intention, is that we would release and republish the next 3 for sure in the next couple of years. We're being a little ambitious, but this is our goal.
That's what we'd really like to do, is to just, we say update, but just to bring them into the present to another generation of students. The books are so popular in classrooms. I've had so many parents and teachers either talk to me personally or write me an email or a letter and thank me because their child who was a reluctant reader read the books and just is now an avid reader, things like that. So, and it's so exciting. I know a lot of rural schools, and I know some city schools as well, but a lot of rural schools in grades 5, 6, 7, sometimes 8, read 1 or 2 of the books, plan their whole year-end class trip around that, and go to Moose Jaw for the day, tour the tunnels and do other things in Moose Jaw. So it's really gratifying for me to know how well loved the books are.
That is absolutely wonderful. And now they can be brought to a whole new generation of readers. Speaking of whole new generation of readers and writers, this next question comes from Nicole Cody. Nicole asks, hi Mary, I'm an intern teacher reading this book with a class. One of the students is here tonight, actually. Hello.
Awesome.
I was wondering if there is anything you would share about writing that I could pass along to them as young writers. Thank you so much for this.
On the spur of the moment like that, I guess basically I would say a couple of things. What really helped me was that I was a reader. And so I would read something from a story or an author, something that I really liked. And I would think, gee, I wonder if I could try to write something similar or describe something this way. Or I might read a book and I really loved it, except I hated the ending, and then I would write my own ending or change the main character or those kinds of things. So I would say just read and write and have a lot of fun with it. Share it with your family, your friends, and just, yeah, work away at it.
All excellent advice. We actually have a note. The student is Mason Matishan, who is in the chat tonight. And Mason
Hi,
says,
Mason.
an awesome presentation.
Thank you.
Our next question here is from Jim B. Jim B says, is it then a possibility that you will be doing a historical book about these facts and theories regarding the tunnels? I found them fascinating when I visited.
Wow. Well, I haven't thought about that. Are you going to be my research assistant, Jim? We might make a good team. That's a good idea. I'll have to think about that.
That's your call, Bill, Jim. Time to become research assistant.
Yeah.
We have some more comments in the chat. First, from Carol Goddard, who says, you are well remembered by the local people in Avonmore.
Aw. That's wonderful. Yeah, it's been a long time.
Couple others from Jennifer Wallace. We have glad you are here. And from Nicole Cody, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anybody else continue dropping questions in the chat or putting your hand up? I should be able to see everybody. In the meantime, I'm actually really curious about a question for Mary. You mentioned that you've continued to see the impact of the books on generations of young readers and writers, about people planning their trips around going to Moose Jaw. When I was preparing for this reading, actually, I was doing it with a couple of friends who went to the same elementary school about 15 years ago. And all I had to do was say Tunnels of Time. And they're like, wait a minute, that book was in our school library. That was the one in Moose Jaw, right? And then they went off on a tirade while I was still working. And both of them are writers now. They both write for both pleasure and professionally. And it sounds like that was a really formative experience for them. What has the impact been for you seeing these students come into reading, discover a love of reading, discover a love of writing, and maybe becoming writers themselves based on your books?
It's amazing. It's bringing tears to my eyes, and it touches my heart. Always. It's yeah. I think writing, well, every art form is a gift, and writing is definitely a gift, and I'm always so humbled that I can give back with my writing.
You've certainly given a lot. More from the chat. We have Jim B. Follow-up comment from Jim. I'd love to help if I could, and I have a great typist at my side.
Yes, we'll have to talk, Jim. That sounds good. Now that Claudette's retired, we can, yeah, we can put her to work.
Perhaps something can be made of this. Quick question before she leaves, from Michelle Stembler. Michelle says, sorry, I need to sign off, but I really enjoyed the presentation. I love to hear about young people being turned on to reading.
Thank you, Michelle. I hope to meet you someday.
In person and not just over the internet.
In person, yes. Down in Portland. Stay safe.
We have more questions. From Sandra Brookman. Sandra asks, what are you working on now?
Well, I was just talking to Dina about 2 ideas that I have. I wrote 2 books that are actually right behind me here. And I think, Sandra, when I was in your class, I talked about Skybird and Mastosony. And these are books with First Nation characters. So even though I am not First Nation, I walked the journey and worked very closely with friends of mine who are. And I have another story in my head that would go with these two. That's a story about a Métis person. And so that one, I talked to Dina that I'd really like to get out there. And then the other thing we did talk about too is to think about working on Tunnels of Terror. So those are the two things that I'm working on right now.
It's been exciting to work with Mary on this kind of revisioning of the book, even though the majority of the story is the same. It's been fascinating to watch just the process of her making the chapters shorter, of her updating some of the language, of the little bit more research that we needed. My background is journalism, so I'm sure that I was quite a pain in her ear for a while, because I kept saying, Mary, I don't understand the underpass part. What is that? Because we were working with an artist, I wanted to make sure the map was something that I could understand and thus other readers could understand. So we had to do a little bit more on that as well. But to work with an artist to bring to life Mary's vision of what these characters look like, that was really wonderful. And Wendy Nordell in Alberta is a fantastic artist. And huge props to some of our other Sask Books members who recommended her to us. I believe she's related to one of our other publishers, Ed Willett. And Heather Nickel mentioned her, and we're just delighted to be able to work with her on this book and looking forward to continuing that work with her. It's really cool to see what Andrea looks like in Mary's mind.
Well, and in Wendy's mind too, like, you know.
Of course.
Together, the
based,
two of
yeah,
us.
yeah.
Yeah, but she did an amazing job. I mean, the cover is just fabulous. If you've had a chance to actually look at it, it looks like Andrea is in a vortex, and the numbers from the clock in the background, from the Moose Jaw clock, are jumping off into the vortex. And so you know something exciting is happening, and you probably know she's heading back in time. I just love this cover, and it's so colorful, very inviting.
It looks wonderful and very different from the covers when they were published 20 years ago as well. Nice.
Well, the cover definitely updated the book. You know, I mean, those covers were amazing back when 20 years ago. I thought they were great, but you know how things change, and clothes, you know, trendy things change, everything changes, and yeah. Kind of like glasses, right?
Yeah, we all know about glasses here.
Yeah, you look back, you know, even 10 years ago and go, did I actually wear those?
Oh, we have some more questions. First one from Patty Harrelkin. Patty says,
oh, it's my sister. Hi, Patty.
Hi, Patty. Patty says, when I posted this event on Facebook, 2 people from my son's class from Banff when he was 10 messaged me to say they remember Mary coming to the school and reading from her book. They say they still have the books, and one says her kids are reading the Tunnel series now.
Ah, that is an awesome, awesome story. I have a similar story to relate to that too. I have had several teachers, actually, young teachers now, who are just coming up. They've been interning and now they're teaching their first, second, third year. And they say to me, you know, I read Tunnels of Time when I was in grade 5 or 6 or whatever, and I really want to use it with my class. And so it's still a beloved book with them. So I'm glad it stays with people.
The longevity it has had is singular.
Mm. Yeah.
Speaking of, we have a question from Brent Bishu. Brett says, what age group would you suggest for the books?
So usually grade 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 and 8 as well, especially the Tunnels of Tyranny and, well, Treachery, yeah, because Andrea ages with every book. So she's 16. Well, there's a couple where she doesn't age that much, but anyway, by the end she's 16, and so the older kids can relate. The other thing I've been told about this series is that you don't have to read them in order. So that's a really good thing. I worked really hard to try to make sure that that was the way. So it's nice to know that it actually worked out that way. I also have been told that the books have often made their rounds in nursing homes. and old folks homes, because when people go back in time, when Andrea goes back in time, she goes back to the 20s, and it's not too far distant from these people's childhoods, and so they can relate a lot to what's happening. And yeah, it's just, I think, a lot of fun too, to just think about life back then. People say, oh, maybe it was simpler or that. I'm not sure, but it's just fun to almost reminisce as you read.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. Keep dropping questions in the chat, folks. We started a little late, so we'll let Mary and Dina call it whenever they get too sleepy to answer questions. But I definitely have a burning question. This one specifically, though, is for Dina.
Okay.
Dina, you're a publisher who has published lots of different books, lots of books by Mary specifically in this age range. Could you walk us through the process of what it's like? What's the difference between publishing a book that has never been published before, that is fresh off the manuscript, just getting released into the world, versus republishing this book 20 years later? What's the process been like?
Wow.
Check. Good question.
Yeah, that's very interesting. When I met Mary, as I said, these books were out. She was working on number 5 at the moment when I met her in 2004. So shortly after that, I promptly became the owner of the first 4 books and read them all. And then when Mary brought me the revamped Tunnels of Time, I did not go back and look and compare page to page. What did she change? I just read it all as though I was reading it for the first time, because I'm the editor and the publisher. So I went through it all with her, which is normal process for me with the way that I publish books. I go through everything once over, and then I go back to the author, and Janice can attest to this with her rescued book. And I go back to my authors and say, these are the parts that I think need fine-tuning, or I don't understand what you're saying with this word, or I don't understand this, or so I go back there. So that was the same with the republished book as it was with a new book. The things with Mary's that were different from the process was that I had to then take, we had to work together to be conscious of Cato Books was no longer in business. So we had to make sure that Mary had the rights to republish the book, to take the manuscript and do whatever with it. So we clarified all of that with our Sask Book colleagues, with my colleagues, and with folks that she knew. We decided things that we wanted to change, and the cover, we knew we needed to change the cover because we did not own the artwork. Unless we decided we wanted to go with that, which we did not. What else did we change, Mary? What else did we have to look at? We decided, the parts that she wanted to add to the back. There were things that she wondered about adding. There are some questions for classrooms, and we decided together that that was something that was better left out of the actual physical book. So the rest of the process.
We had to make sure that we could use the title too. We had to make sure that we could use the title as well.
Right.
And that was, yeah, we had to go and just make sure. It would have been horrible if we had to change the title.
Yes, we were very worried about that. We did make a decision to change the subtitle, though. We wanted it to be linked directly to Moose Jaw, so we called it, instead of the Tunnels of Moose Jaw Adventures, we called it Moose Jaw Time Travel Adventure #1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and that distinctly tells you it's Moose Jaw based, it's time travel, it's an adventure, all of those in one really lovely tagline. Thank you, Mary, for that brilliant idea. We work very well together. Again, instant friendship and just the same wavelength. The rest of the process, after I went through it originally, Mary did some rewrites, I guess you would call it, fine tuning, sent it back to me. I edited it. We went back and forth many times, right down to the layout, sent the layout to the printer, and then basically redid an entire, the poor printer, because we changed our mind at the last minute on several things and said, there are still pieces that need to be changed. They weren't big pieces, but they were significant in that I needed extra days to get it all together.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's kind of a complicated process that changes with every book a little bit, but it's still kind of manuscript comes to me, I do initial editing, send it back to the author, they send it back to me, and it goes back and forth till we're both happy with the manuscript. Then I do the layout, then the author and I look at the layout. Meanwhile, I do most of the connection with the artist, and we had to go through the book. Mary went through the book, and we wanted to space out the images.
Yeah.
So that was different from the original because the original didn't have any art in it. And then we gave Wendy options of, in this 10 pages of the book, these are the 3 images that you could choose to do, one of these 3. And so it's a very much a collaborative effort. And that's also, Mary may want to speak to, why did she choose to self-publish and be so in tune with this part rather than having a publisher like me do a traditional thing where once she gives me the manuscript, I can do whatever I want with it. Do you want to talk about self-publishing and why that was such an interest?
So my last, what is this, the sixth book, has been self-published. And the biggest reason for that is with a traditional publisher at this point, you sign a contract and you basically lose all your creative rights. The publisher has the right to change your story any way they want. They have the right to choose the title, to choose the artwork, or whether or not there is artwork, to choose the font, like everything right down to the size of the font, the kind of paper they use. And writing is an art, and what your book looks like actually makes or breaks your book. And I think that the writer should have more rights than they actually have. So that is a really important point for me. And so to be able to help decide what the cover needs to look like, actually with this, I said to Dina, okay, long before we decided we were going to do this, I said, if we do this, here's what I want this to look like. I said, I saw this book. It kind of didn't look like this, but it kind of had a vortex on it. And I said, I think that would work really well for Tunnels of Time. And so right down to that, I also feel I need to have the say in the editing and the things that are either being edited out or being added. One book in my experience, they wanted to edit it so much that it was not going to be my story anymore. And so that's really important to me, that it is my story and my words. And so that's why I choose to self-publish.
Thank you. And for those who don't know the difference between self-publishing and traditional publishing, traditional, it's basically who pays the bill. So traditional publishing, the publisher pays for everything, and then the author gets a percentage of a royalty from what is sold. And then in the self-publishing, or in our case, I'm called a hybrid publisher because I accept monies from the author to pay for some of the, like the printing and the editing. Mary paid for those costs. And then I do a lot of work behind the scenes. I do a lot of marketing and things that I don't charge for. Like there are many things that I do that she doesn't get an hourly bill for that. But so we work in partnership. So it's kind of self-publishing, co-publishing, partnership sort of thing. So it's kind of a little bit muddy. And then there is strictly self-publishing where you pay somebody to do everything and then you get your book. It's kind of complex and gets a little bit strange, but there you go.
So in terms of a traditional publisher, you get a royalty check once a year. That royalty check is 10%. So if your book sells for, let's say, $9 at a bookstore, you would get 90 cents per book. So the idea is you would sell lots of books. However, if your book is being sold at Costco or Walmart or a place like that where they take a bigger cut, then you would only get 45 cents for each of those books. So that's another thing to, just to be aware of.
The goal is that if you self-publish it, you have more money invested. So, hopefully you will get more money back from it. You don't know. We throw it up in the air. We pray.
It's a risk every time. Yeah, it's a risk.
Yeah, we're really lucky, though, in Saskatchewan to have fabulous publishers like Dina among our ranks, who, from what we've heard from authors time and again, you're always very collaborative working with them. You're always very happy to help support the process and make the book as best as it can be. And that's why we're here at SAS Books are so proud to support you guys in your publishing endeavors. Whether you're a self-publisher, hybrid publisher, or even going more of a traditional route, one of the things we found upon Saskatchewan publishers is that they're a pretty good bunch. They're a good bunch to work with.
Absolutely. I agree that our intention is always to, provide the best product out there. And I don't know any of our publishers who would, publish something that is just not up to their levels.
Mhm.
But I mean, as a writer myself, that is always my goal, to try to work as collaborative as I can. And there are times where I have said to writers, that's not marketable. That's not something that I think would be of interest to a lot of readers out there. So haven't done that with any of Mary's books yet.
Mm,
Can you see
Could
me
happen.
winking?
Could happen.
I see we have a question about this, or a couple.
We do have some questions. One from Jim B. Does this not look like the problem that would have happened if the publisher told Da Vinci he was going to put a bigger smile on the Mona Lisa?
I think Da Vinci would have had some issues with that. Yes.
I think so too. Yeah.
Yes. Depends on whether Da Vinci was, what are you willing to risk? You have to weigh that, right?
Yeah.
Got to check in those underlayers underneath the Mona Lisa. See how
There
many
you
drafts
go.
he went through.
There you go. Maybe the smile was too big to start with.
Who knows?
A quick note from Carol. I must go. It is getting late here in Ontario. It has been a pleasure putting a face to the name of the author of these books.
Ah.
So
Thank
good
you.
night, Carol,
Yeah,
wherever
thank
you are.
you, Carol.
And we're getting pretty close to the end. We are already far over time of our reading, but I think we'll do a last call for questions in case anyone has anything else burning, like Jennifer Wallace might.
So as Mary knows, I'm getting into this world myself, and I'm just curious as to, as a beginner writer, what would you recommend? Dina and Mary, do you go the route of publishing? Because you were known and established before you did the self-publishing, what route would you recommend?
That's an interesting question.
It's
I guess
preference.
you have to think about your book, your story that you're writing, and think about for one thing, who is your audience and how broad is that audience? I think that's a really important question. I don't know. You could try traditional publishing and see what happens. That's a really good place to start.
Absolutely. And one of the things with traditional publishers, and one of the reasons that I self-published my own books, was because I had the skills to do it, and I didn't have the money, but I did have the skills, and I had support by the company that I wrote the book for, the first book. The other thing is that traditional publishers, I was not willing to wait for 2 or 3 years. Some of my books are timely, and traditional publishers do have a list of books that they're going to publish 2 years from now. It's the way they work. So time frame is part of the consideration. Audience, absolutely. Who can you get it out there yourself? Do you need the help of an actual publisher of any variety? So those are all things I recommend to everybody. Join the Saskatchewan Writers Guild. Join Sask Books, connect with Sask Books about who's out there and what kinds of tools are in this province that can help you. Go to professional development sessions, go to workshops and all of that, and get as much information as you can locally as well as online.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Emily and Daniel. Sask Books, thank you very much for hosting this evening.
Yes, thank you. And thank you again, everyone, for coming. I wish I could have seen all your faces. I'm sure somebody's in their jammas.
Only bottom halves.
Yeah.
Top half, you have to look nice.
It's getting pretty close to pajama time.
It's true. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we have at least one person who's in their PJs.
Pajamas.
But to do our last thank yous, now that we've run a significant period into some of our bedtimes, thank you so much to Dina Driver of DriverWorks Inc. and Mary Harrelkin Bishop, the author of Tunnels of Time. Thank you for taking time out of your day to come and speak with us and walk us through the process of how this book came. and to watch the video with us and put all that together. Thank you. We appreciated it greatly.
Thank you, Emily. Good night, everyone.